We'll start here on the right side.
I have a question regarding the digestibility of some kinds of buffets that are put out that are vegan, and I feel like there's so many nuts involved that it's almost impossible to digest them, and also the larger bean sprouts, but mostly the nuts and the quantity of nuts that are mixed into everything.
A lot of raw food chefs lose sight of the reason why they got involved in this kind of lifestyle in the first place, and they want to make food that satisfies people, and so they use a lot of nuts. What you have to do when you go to these potlucks and buffets is you just have to really be wise. Don't think that it's going to hurt people's feelings if you don't eat everything. Just choose the foods that are going to serve you best. Load up your plate with a lot of greens. You don't even have to eat the dressing that they prepare. Oftentimes the dressing is just full of oil and sugar and vinegar, and what a caustic combination that is. You want to go away with a lot of air in your gut, eat some of these dressings. But a lot of times people will bring avocados, and that, if you have an avocado with your salad, that can be satisfying. Choose the foods that serve you. I'm not a nut-phobic. I'm not afraid of eating nuts, but you certainly can't make that a large part of your diet. A little bit goes a long way.
Yeah. And certainly if you're going to eat the bigger nuts, like almonds, you should be soaking them first. It makes them more digestible. But if you're talking about shelled sunflower seeds or sesame seeds, those are small enough, they're more digestible. But I think some discipline is required when eating nuts, because you can easily put a handful of nuts, in your hand and chug it down. And that's very hard on your digestive system. These are complex foods, they're mixtures of protein and fat, and they're very concentrated. So we have to be mindful of portion size when it comes to nuts, very much so. And it's too easy to overdo it because it's finger food, it's quick. It's fast, it's like a snack, but you could be consuming. And on the subject of nuts, I think peanut butter is kind of the worst offender, because any kind of nut butter concentrates those nuts even more. So things like almond butter and peanut butter, so many of us are guilty of smearing on these, half-inch thick layers of peanut butter on something. And honestly, we were never designed to consume that kind of density. Because truly, if you were going to eat peanuts, the proper way would be to spend the time to break it open out of its shell. And let me tell you, if you had to do that, you would be done in 15 minutes, and you might be, maybe you had like 20 peanuts, but that's nothing in comparison to what you smear on, your peanut butter on your bread or whatever. It's something to be very watchful about, and try thinking also about portion size and also pre-soaking them.
And I have another suggestion as well. When I'm going to go to a restaurant, or I'm going to go out to dinner at someone's house, I have a big salad before I go, so that I'm not hungry enough that I'm going to make poor choices and overeat foods that are just not going to make me feel good.
Just two comments on nuts. In the United States, you cannot buy raw nuts anymore out of California. That's part of the international Codex rulings that the food industry and pharmaceutical are trying to manipulate all of this. And so that's number one. Number two, why we overeat nuts. And I got hemorrhoids when I started this, because you're eating out of emotions. You really don't need heavy food, but initially, because you're so used to squelching your emotional state with heavy, you give up the meats, you give up the soy burgers, whatever it would be. We tend to overeat nuts and seeds. So that's the issue in most of our cases. I know it was for me at the beginning. Okay, over on this side.
Yes, I had two questions about liquids. One is about vinegar. When I was at Hippocrates, we were told not to eat vinegar, also at Living Light. And I'd like your answers to when people talk about apple cider vinegar as though that were the cure-all. So what do you say to people? I'm a little confused about that. The second question is about kombucha. And I know you talked about this, Brian, at Hippocrates. And there are a lot of people now making their own as well as you buy it in the store. And as a recovering alcoholic with 20 years of sobriety, I know that once I have one, I want to have every one. So I know there's something wrong with it, and I wonder if you'd articulate, because I think there are a lot of people that feel like these are really health foods.
Okay, number one, raw apple cider vinegar is miraculous. You know, all of this acid alkaline, which is overblown but certainly important. I don't find anything that is more effective that can rapidly balance the acid-alkaline balance within the bloodstream. The exception to that is if you have candida, fungal, or yeast problems. You avoid it. But you take it on its own. You don't take it on food. Now, if I were to give you raw organic apple cider vinegar and put it in your mouth and said, what do you feel? You'd all say, I'm puckering. Your mouth goes like this. It puckers. When you're puckering, what's happening is you're killing not only the bad guys there. That's why apple cider vinegar is good. It kills microbes. But it also wipes out the enzymes that digest food. So how about if I take it and put it on my salad, and notice the cultures that eat the most of it eat highly acid diets. The French, the Italians, the Greeks, etc. Highly, highly acid diets. So they tend to want something that alkalizes. They don't even know why. It's become a flavor or a taste for them. They don't get that it's an instinctual thing that their bodies are saying, please alkalize me. And you put it on that salad or whatever you're putting it on, that food cannot and will not digest in the body. So that's it. Kombucha is an absolute fraud. It's a joke. If I wanted to get you sick, I'd give you kombucha. You put water in a container, you put sugar in a container, and it ferments. Now, I don't want you to have sugar if you're the healthiest person in the world. This is white sugar in almost every case. To top it all off, the commercial companies now put agave syrup in with it or honey in it. And it has about an 8% alcohol content. So you don't have to be an alcoholic to want that. You have to be a sugar addict like every one of us, including I am here. The difference between active sugar addicts and inactive sugar addicts is we're all addicts. I'm still a sugar addict. I just choose not to take kombucha and lots of sugar because I'm like you. I was never an alcoholic. I would have been, I'm sure. I opened up cookies. I ate the whole box. I opened a watermelon when I was a raw fruit nut. I'd eat 30-pound watermelons. So I get that. And so kombucha is just fulfilling a very addictive personality to get alcohol under the auspices of this is really a health food. Just like a lot of these, quote, health foods are. They're really just the same old in an organic package at this point. So again, if I wanted to get you sick, I would give you sugar water that fermented into a not-so-good bacteria. There are some good bacteria in, but not-so-good bacteria are in there too. Back when we were using Rejuvelac at Hippocrates, thank goodness there were 4 of us in the world that were known as leaders in raw food then. This is before the raw food movement. 3 of us were in a room. Anne was not there. And all of us looked at one another and said, are you drinking Rejuvelac? Not one of us were, but the next day I was going to get up in front of a group and tell them to do it. Now, we all had our excuses. Oh, we don't need it anymore. We're too good for it. All this bullshit. The truth is we didn't like it. And there happened to be a guy in there who worked at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and he said, well, let's study it. Let's test it. I can go into the labs up there, and we can test it. And he called us a week and a half later and said, let's rename it. Called it Rejuverat. Because he said, yeah, it has a few good bacteria in it, but 6 out of 10 batches that we made under the Hippocrates recipe had unfriendly bacteria in it. So great idea, great concept, philosophically wonderful, but not true. Now, if you want good bacteria, we stabilize them, we culturize them, we actually make them almost suspended animation now. You don't even need refrigeration. Bacteria you can get. But by the way, the medical field, just like it's led us to understand more about phytochemicals, are now going in the next 10 years through fecal implantation into human bodies, etc., are going to teach us really more about bacteria than we know in the alternative field at this point. It's good for you, necessary, everyone needs it, but frankly, even the best of us don't really know what the hell we're talking about with this. Another $10 billion worth of research, we're going to be able to come here and say, here are the bacteria you need in your body, but it's certainly not from kombucha tea. Once again, I'll repeat. Hippocrates Health Institute has not used Rejuvelac for 30 years. I'll repeat once again. 4 of us were called leaders. One was Ann Wigmore in raw food then. There were no other leaders in the world known as leaders. 3 of us were not drinking Rejuvelac. And I won't name names, but the reality is when we studied it at the University of Massachusetts, not we, but the guy who worked there, he said, when I tested these, 6 out of 10 batches had highly unfriendly bacteria to moderately unfriendly bacteria. So when I was drinking that Rejuvelac, why he called it Rejuvarot, I could have infected my body with microbes and weakened my what system? Immune system. Now that's a fact. I would love to tell you a love story, but it's not going to be true.
Yeah, and at the time, when Ann Wigmore was teaching about Rejuvelac, I got into it and I made all kinds of different varieties, and in my recipe book there's several different versions of it. But what I found in practice is that making Rejuvelac required somewhat of a skill, and it was somewhat of an art to make it correctly and properly. You know, it had to taste just tart, and it had to be sour. But if you had the temperature a little bit too high, if you let it go a little bit too long in time, then you get the wrong kind of bacteria. So I also came to the conclusion when I heard you stopped, I immediately knew why. Because the majority of students were unable to successfully make the recipe with the correct bacteria on a repeated basis. And it was too risky to have to be creating a beverage with bad bacteria in it. And that was the reality. It was too difficult to make successfully and correctly.
And by the way, it wasn't Hippocrates that invented that. If you go to Slavic countries now, if you go to Lithuania now, if you go to Bavaria in Germany, they still use this. It's a traditional drink.
And I'd like to say something more about vinegar and in dressings. In all 4 of my books that I've written, I don't have any vinegar in any of them. I've not used vinegar for 40 years because I experience the effects of vinegar in my own body. If I ingest vinegar, I feel bloated, not necessarily gassy, but I feel like I ate too much food when I know I didn't. My belt buckle gets, my belt gets too tight. I just know that it's not good for me. And you can create delicious foods using other kinds of acidic components like lemons, even orange. A little bit of orange in a dressing gives both sweet and sour flavors. So you can use a little bit of pineapple with lemon to give a little sweet and sour flavoring in dressings. So you can use acidic ingredients that are not vinegar, that don't create that same kind of havoc with your digestion. It's not difficult. You don't have to depend on vinegar.
When Cherie bloats up, she goes from a size 0 to a size 1. We go over to this side now.
Hi, Brian. I eat a vegan diet, and I suffer from migraines often. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what foods to stay away from, if there are a list of foods, and then when I have a migraine, what foods should I eat? Because I do know it's food related.
If you know it's food related, you may have an allergy to glutinous foods, the obvious ones. I know you're not taking dairy food at this point. Foods that literally are flour product based often give allergens to people, because the histamine levels are thrown off. So you may be one of those people with migraines that you have a rush of histamine because you may not even have a gluten allergy, but have a reactive chemical reaction to what the flour product does. And so that's the first one I'd look at. I would go for a month without taking any flour products at all, even sprouted. Just stay away from everything. rule out things. This is better than going to an allergen doctor. Number two, look at sugars. And sugars, we find that more people through the SpectraCell testing we do have a fructose allergy than they do a glucose allergy, which is interesting. And why? Because high fructose corn syrup was part of your diet, my diet, as we were growing up. And most children today, they're going to be worse than we are. But the fact is that that's another one. So look at everything from the fruits you eat, worse than that extraction of, sugars from those fruits in any way. And then the obvious usual suspects, the white sugars, the honeys, all of these types of things. Then the last thing I would do is look at food combining. I mean, I know I never really much had headaches, but I used to have headaches on and off when I didn't combine food correctly. And food would ferment in my intestinal tract. And each person's different. Some people have very rapid metabolisms, and they don't have that effect. You may have a moderate. I would assume you have a more moderate metabolism, and that could in and of itself be what it is. And then, in 3 months, you go through all of those. Each month you get rid of one of them, and you should know at that point.
Okay.
And may I also just say processed foods. If you eat any processed foods at all, there are a lot of food chemicals that might be considered safe for the general population, but you could be having a reaction to anything, xanthan gum or any of those kinds of stabilizing or ingredients that are pretty commonly used in processed foods, even in so-called healthy food.
One good way of finding out which foods you're sensitive to is to take a week off from food, to go on a fast for a week. And then, once you've cleansed your system, reintroduce the foods you're suspicious of, one at a time, and give yourself 15 minutes to see if you have any kind of response to it. And you might discover that there are some offensive foods there.
Yeah, for healthy people, that's a great suggestion. A green juice fast.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Here we are.
Hi. What do you think of the sweetener stevia, or do you have a different sweetener of choice if you were going to put something sweet? And do you recommend that we try to eat fermented foods in our diet, like tempeh and things like that? I mean, do you think fermented foods are good things?
Let's start. Dan or Cherie?
Well, stevia is the only sweetener that I'm aware of that is a non-glucose sweetener that is not like saccharin or NutraSweet. Yeah. So it's not glucose related. So it's not going to affect diabetes. It's not going to have the same effect. It's not going to my awareness, it's not going to feed pathogenic bacteria like Candida or yeasts. So it's a safe sweetener. However, be aware that some of the big sweetener companies that make little packets of sugar and aspartame and what is it called, sucralose, all of those products now, those companies have now adopted stevia as well, and they're genetically modifying it in several cases. So when you see stevia in those little packets, and it's from one of those big companies, it could very well be genetically modified. I think what they're doing, and their reason for it is they wanted to get rid of the aftertaste. First, there's different ways of processing stevia. The original stuff is a green powder, all right, and that has a lot of flavor to it. So that may not work well in your cup of coffee, right, because it's going to impart its own flavor. So some of the natural products manufacturers have a way of processing it so that it's less of a flavor, it's more neutral, and it's whiter. But the big companies are doing this with genetic modification. And so I'm suspicious of all of that.
I want to jump in and say, because of this, and then we'll go on. One of our alumnus was gracious enough to correct me because why we save stevia. Stevia was going to be put off the market in the United States, as it is in many European countries. The sugar lobby is so strong that they literally wipe out stevia because it's a healthy thing for you. And I assumed that Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola that saved it in this country, stevia, were putting it in zero, and she corrected me today. They put it in vitamin water and more health-oriented. But this has aspartame in it. Aspartame was outlawed, by the way, under the Reagan administration, and one of his closest colleagues, Reagan, basically pushed to have it approved, and when he left the administration, was making $2 million a year back 30 years ago, I guess 25, 30 years ago, as a consultant to the aspartame industry. I have a book in my office, medical book, this thick and that large, Aspartame Disease, starting with brain cancer. And I'm sorry I interrupted, but I wanted to correct what I had said before.
The stevia that you're talking about, also some of these packets of white stevia have a lot of different fillers in them so that you can use them, you can measure them more easily, because stevia is so concentrated that if you just use a little bit too much dust, then that flavor that you're talking about that's kind of almost a licorice chemical flavor takes over, and you just can't appreciate, the other food, the food that you're eating. So they add a lot of chemicals or fillers so that you can use more of it without changing the flavor. So you need to know what those fillers are. Excuse me.
There's an article in the New York Times magazine section last Sunday, the whole article about the production of stevia and all its offshoots, like Truvia and all that.
Truvia. That's one of them.
Truvia is half sugar, isn't it? It's half white sugar. Yeah. Xylitol is sugar.
And I personally, as I said earlier, is I do have a sweet tooth, and to get myself cut back, is stevia was a useful tool. And what I found is to use a little bit of stevia and still use as much of natural sweeteners if I'm going to use some in what I'm doing, and it allows me to cut the amount of sugar way down and not have the stevia taste. Because if you're trying to use stevia, it's one good way to get off sugar, because you'll find you just don't like it if you get one drop too much.
Okay, we'll have the last. What time is it?
9:40.
Okay, so maybe not the last. If we get one more over here. Yes?
Hi, I would like to bring up the topic of juice fasting in a little bit more of a detailed level tonight, as it's coming up very often, for two reasons. Firstly, because, I'm a raw foodist and a vegan for many years now, and I have a very healthy, balanced, proper, informed vegan diet. But this was not always the case. When I first discovered the benefits of juice fasting, I loved it, saw all the benefits that you guys talk about, but 1 month became once a month, twice a week, 3 times a week, and I ended up weighing 98 pounds.
Oh,
Right.
You were anorexic?
I was orthorexic, as many people are calling it, which is wonderful because I've read many of your articles. I was obsessed with all literature, but I didn't know how to do it properly. So I've learned how to do it properly, but I was really fascinated because you said you have gone 102 days on a juice fast, and you look alive and well and thriving.
He also walks on water.
So I don't know how that mixed with my chemistry during the juice fast, and it didn't work out as well as I hoped it would, and other people's reviews on how the process worked did not work the same for me. The second part of that is I'm broadening my literature that I read from because I don't want to be as biased. I was only raw food authors at one point, but now I'm trying to branch out. So I'm reading a lot more of the Huffington Post. And just last week, there was a huge Facebook post saying, I quote, "Another research study debunks the juice detox yet again," talking about how the proteins and the amino acid profile are completely dead within the first minute in juices after going through the blender or the juicer within the first minute. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you mixed in blender and juicer there at the end, and they're very different, right? Because a blender is a puree, and a juicer is an extraction. So in one case, the blender is, you're eating, a smoothie is a whole food. You're eating the whole food. You're actually not chewing it. The blender has taken care of that mechanical work for you. A juicer is a water extract of what's in that vegetable. Blenders, I have a big. I'm opposed to high-speed blending. I'm okay with low-speed blending. If you look at the Vitamix goes from 1,000 RPMs to 37,000 RPMs, and a lot of people, just turn it right up. But that's the equivalent to a 230 mile per hour wind. And let me tell you, even Hurricane Katrina was only 180 miles per hour, and buildings fell down. So, certain, nutrients are being oxidized to death when you're keeping it on. And I'm writing a recipe book now, and I talk about turning the blender on for 10 seconds. Short periods of time, minimize oxidation. But we're really talking about juice fasting. That was your question. And in juice fasting, everything you do, whether you're eating solid food or whether you're eating liquid food, whether you're eating juicers, it has to be balanced, all right? And I like to focus very much on the green vegetables. I want to juice the brassica family. I want to juice the kale and the collards and the parsley and the celery. I want to put some garlic in there, or alternatively, I want to put some ginger in there. I want the spinach. I want the medicine from those vegetables, and that's when I'm on a juice cleanse, I'm drinking a minimum of a quart of that. I'll have other drinks. I'll also have a quart of water. The flush that I'm leading a group right now in a week juice cleanse, and we try to consume a gallon of fluids in the course of every day. We aim for that. That's our goal. And it's water and it's juice, minimal amounts of the sweet juices. And even carrots and beets are very sweet. And, if you have sugar sensitivities, if you are prone to candida or any pathogens, they're going to love the sugar that they're getting from that beet juice, and they're going to love it, what they're getting from carrot juice, and even pineapple juice, which I love very much. But citruses like lemon, they're a little different. I do a lemon grapefruit cleanse as part of this. But you were losing excessive amount of weight, and it's hard to diagnose what the reasons for that are. But these programs have to be managed very carefully. They have to have balance in them. Even though we're dealing with liquids, you still have to have a balanced diet. And that might be a clue for you to consider.
I'll try to bullet point it, because you said a lot of very important things for the listeners out there around the world as well as here. Number one, you didn't have a diet problem. You had an emotional problem. And why that happens to young women in our culture is that your image of what a woman or a girl should look like is twiggy, a size -0. And to live up to that because you don't feel strong enough about yourself, you just starve yourself under the auspices of health foods. And we see this. I don't believe in orthorexia. I just think this is another form of anorexia. Number two, when the human body is looked at biologically, not philosophically, when we get sick, it doesn't want to eat. So anyone that would try to debunk fasting doesn't know anatomy, biochemistry, or human history. It's factual that to detoxify, eliminate, to help to resist and eliminate disease and disorder, as well as activate the immune system, the elimination of solid food needs to be part of the equation. And why that works, by the way, is you only have X amount of energy in your body. Let's picture 100% energy. And if you're putting in foods, certainly the bad foods that most people eat, probably 98% of the energy is going on pushing that waste out. But how about if you're not eating food, and then on top of that, you're eating nutritious food with life in it that are not blended and killed Within a matter of 90 seconds, 90% of the nutrients are gone in a blender, high-speed blender. You're getting juices. But the other thing is that you juice food and let it sit out, in 15 minutes it's as dead as a doorknob too. It oxidizes. So fresh, raw green juices, and I completely concur, and stay away from the greens because most of you here are really systematic addicts to sugar. And your body doesn't care if you get it from white sugar, if you get it from carrot juice, you get it from beet juice, kombucha tea, agave syrup, xylitol, which is just out of a birch tree. It's not out of a maple tree. And this actually, xylitol is 68% sugar by weight. Maple syrup, 65% sugar. Honey, 98% sugar by weight. White sugar, 100% sugar. Brown sugar, 99.6% sugar. So these are sugars, and it doesn't determine. And, when we first at Hippocrates eliminated fruit from the diet of people with cancer, we were condemned. And, by the way, I didn't want to do it because I was eating half my raw diet was fruit then. It was a really easy diet at that stage. Just like most of the raw food enthusiasts still tell you high fruit diets are good for you. And we, by chance, not by intelligence, recognized that cancer tumors were growing when people were taking high amounts of fruit. And we did a little study. We had to do everything hidden at that stage. We took 9 of our affluent guests, pulled them aside and said, would you do blood tests on your insurance? And took 5 of them off fruits and all fruit juices, and the other 4 we left on it. And within 2 months, we pulled fruit out of the diet for cancer. And within a year, after that, a little bit more than a year, we pulled it away from viruses and bacteria. We actually, in Petri dishes, under microscopes, looked at viruses, rhino and retroviruses. When we put fruit juice on it, it looked like the San Andreas winds behind a forest fire in California. It's just like this. Your eyes couldn't keep up with it. So today, by the way, MIT, Dr. Anna Marie and I just read a study last week. MIT further gave us wisdom and knowledge on this, the pathways of how sugar feeds disease. And every major cancer institute, including Sloan, some of the better educated doctors there, now are telling their cancer patients not to eat fruit and take fruit juice because it feeds cancer and viruses and mold and bacteria and yeast equally to white sugar. So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for my colleagues and friends. Get a good sleep because tomorrow we have a packed-filled day of knowledge and wisdom. Be well.